And there's a little spot for internal only as well. That's for stuff that's like when it comes back from x-ray, the ones that failed from x-ray and things like that. So non-conforming is any material that does not meet predetermined requirements. So some associated materials that go with this is the non-conforming product tag, this one right here, which must go with all the non-conforming products. The non-conforming product record form, Form 8301, which is this one that I just showed you guys. And then the corrective action form, which I actually don't have a copy of that one right now, but I'll show you guys that one in a second. And the RMA log. So let's see, what was the form of the other one? Form 8502. This one, the corrective action report, which that one has a separate procedure, which we will be going over later on. Okay, so the president or CEO shall select and approve personnel in regards to making decision on the disposition of non-conforming products based on position in the organization, knowledge or experience of the product or parts, interactions with the customer, authority to make decisions on behalf of the company or his/her department. So right now, the ones that have, authorization, I only have authorization when the non-conformances are found for x-rays, so that we can use them for Group B, Group C, and things like that, which I guess we're going to have to talk to Ryan about a little more and see if you guys are approved to sign off on that as well now. Just because we do need to have, approval for that. But other than that, it's only Ryan, Alan, and Ben that tell you how to disposition them. So in case of a non-conforming material, the QA department shall always be notified before proceeding with this procedure. A non-conforming product record shall be accessed, printed, and completed by the manager or representative of that department. So pretty much the person that found the non-conforming product, they're the ones that are going to be filling this out. Okay, so the non-conforming product record shall be attached to the product. The internal only will be checked off only when the non-conforming product is found internally, for example, during x-ray, etc. Resolution may include corrective action if applicable. Applicable departments are notified of non-conformances and corrective actions. So this is telling you how to fill it out. So who inspected or received when the non-conforming products were found. So for now, we're going to use the example if a non-conforming product was found by LA X-ray. So let's say, we received back the parts from X-ray. So then you're going to put inspected by, let's say, LA X-ray, and then you put the date that is shown on the actual report. So that's the date that you put here. And then you put the quantity inspected. So however many it says were inspected on the report, which is usually the whole lot, you put the quantity in there. So let's say the lot was for 100, we sent over 100 to be x-rayed, then you put quantity inspected 100. The quantity rejected would be however many failed x-ray. So then you put how many failed. Let's say, for example, only 5 failed. So then you put it there. And then the part number would be for the job that those parts were for. So that also this would be our part number, just so you know, our part number. And then the customer that it was for, let's say Honeywell. The job number, and then you would check off internally because that was found internally still, like it wasn't sent to the customer and then returned back. It was still internal. So you go ahead and you check that off. So you put here what was wrong for with the product. So in the case of an x-ray, let's say that there was a void or extraneous material. Sometimes it'll be both, so you gotta, put exactly what that was for. So if it was only for serial numbers 1 to 3 that were for void, then you put serial numbers 1 to 3, failed for void, and then serial numbers 4 to 5 were due to extraneous material, let's say. And then you would check off x-ray. Okay, so let's see. All of this has to be completed. if somebody were to give it to you, because let's say they were the ones that found the non-conforming product, you weren't the one that had to fill this out. If any of this is missing, you'd give it back to them and, you know, let them know that you have to have all of these sections completed. Unless it was like internal and they just forgot to check that off, you can just check it off yourself. But for anything else, you know, you have to have them do it because they're the ones that are supposed to fill it out. Okay, so section 3 right here. Section 3 is only completed once one of our authorized reps, which in this case it's like myself, Alan, Ben and Ryan. So for the technical representative here, it's usually either Van or Lorenzo that will check off on it. So you would, you know, it just depends what it's dispositioned as. So in the case where I'm allowed, the only time that I'm allowed to approve these ones are when we're using them for like group B. So let's say that I checked with Lorenzo already, you know, he said that we can go ahead and use it for group B. So right here in the reprocess section, I know we're not reprocessing it technically. I mean, technically we are, technically not. You just put what serial numbers of the failed ones, of course, you use for group B. So serial numbers 1 through 4, let's say, were used for group B. So then you put here serial numbers 1 through 4, used for group B, and then you sign off here, and then you date, and you put use as is. But in any other cases, this would only be dispositioned by Alan, Ben, or Ryan. So for the reprocess, usually this one is when it's reprocessed, but this is also a place where you'll see probably in the future that we just write some notes here, because sometimes the parts are used for other things. Sometimes, I don't know, Alan takes them to use for whatever. You just put Alan took this serial number. There's like one that I ran into like that, I think. But yeah, you'll just see like little notes, because you always have to see where the parts are if the parts are not attached to the form. So right here, like I said, so section 4, if our authorized rep gives approval of reprocessing the non-conforming products, the steps that were made to reprocess the products must be explained here. So everything that was done to the part has to be explained here, which usually just the person that's reprocessing, they'll be the ones to fill that out. So once reprocessed, an item is able to pass inspection per established specifications. It must be signed and approved by an authorized rep, and then date of approval written as well. So again, this one right here, we would never sign off on this one unless you get approved by somebody. I never had approval for that, but this section is only for management, upper management. So note, when the internal only is checked off, the product is not recorded on the record non-conforming product log. So that's really important. So whenever it's internal, or actually better yet, whenever it's a customer return, it'll go on the non-conforming product log. But if you ever see this checked off, which most of the non-conforming product is, internal only, you don't need to put it on log. You guys have any questions on that part right there? No? Okay. Any questions so far on anything else? No? Okay. Okay, so when an item is found to be non-conforming, it will be tagged with a non-conforming product tag by the person who filled it out. So pretty much these two go hand in hand. So whoever does this first section right here has to also fill this out and attach it to the parts. Okay. So these two. And it has relatively the same information. Job number, quantity, reason, and part number. For the reason, if it's really long, you know, try to write it, I guess, as small and as brief as you can, kind of summarize it. But just remember, this one always has to go on the parts. So put the parts in a little bag or whatever. If it has wires exposed, then you want to make sure that you kind of package the parts a little bit before putting it in a bag and before putting this tag on it. And then once you already have this tag on the non-conforming product, then you go ahead and you staple it to this one. So they must always be with the product. Okay. So here we go. Let's see. Oh, so I thought this was important because I got kind of confused at first. So in a case where it's a customer returned, this would be filled out by Anthony. These two. So dispositions such as use as is or repair shall only be used after approval by an authorized representative of our organization. This information is solely so hard to breathe with these masks. Used for internal records, scrap is clearly and permanently marked or positively controlled until physically rendered unusable or destroyed. So if it were to be marked as scrap, then you want to make sure that you write it on this. As soon as they disposition it, you want to put scrap on here. And the last thing that I had heard was that Lorenzo handles the ones that are for scrap. So if they ever disposition it as scrap, you want to go ahead and just hand those over to Lorenzo. So dispositions as used as is or repair may not be used unless specifically authorized by the customer if the nonconformity results in a departure from the contractual requirements. So if it's a customer return, they have to approve it pretty much so we could return it back to them. The item may remain in a quarantine area in shipping, receiving, inspection, or final inspection. The item must be clearly identified as non-conforming and precautions must be taken to ensure it will not be used or shipped without appropriate approval. So pretty much these ones are, for the most part, they're gonna just stay at your desk. But you just wanna make sure, it's just, kind of reiterating that you wanna make sure that these two are with the product. Okay, so record the information into so this is only for customer returns. Record the information into the non-conforming product log as follows. The date, which is date from the non-conforming product record form, which is the date that's going to be right here. The job number, our part number, the quantity rejected, and place of rejection. The class, the reason, and disposition. The disposition is not filled out until the QA rep, which is us technically, is notified by managers what the disposition is. So once you receive a response back from Alan or Ryan or Ben as to what they want to do with the parts, there could only be one line item per part number. Oh, I was just talking about the non-conforming product log. So I don't know if you guys noticed how I was doing it earlier. Because remember how there was one RMA number for the 2 jobs? Mm-hmm. But did you guys notice that I put 2 lines for each of those in the product log? No? Mm-hmm. So, okay, this one, if you guys recall, on the RMA log, it only had 1 RMA because it was all done at once, that's allowed. But you have to put the, for each job individually per line. Is what that part was saying right here. No, there could only be 1 line item per part number.
That's fine. Yeah, that makes sense.
So the non-conforming material is reported onto appropriate suppliers, internal organizations, customer, and regulatory agencies in a timely fashion. That's more like when it's found by a vendor, but we don't really have to deal with that. That's just the purchasing department, so they'll take care of that. Once approval has been given for a disposition, you will first ensure the part is correctly tagged with this. If the tag is missing, then you have to complete one because you have to make sure that they're always with the part. So the reason for this is because if these are just stapled to the part, sometimes there's a lot of them and they're heavy, so it'll come off from the paper. But then we have this on the parts, so it'll be easy to find the paper that it goes with. So that's the whole reasoning behind why we need to make sure that it's always attached. Because we don't want to just have parts loose and then be like, oh, where does this go? What's this for? And then they'll be used when they're, non-conforming. Okay, so remove all the parts from the non-conforming product record form and attach the form to the end of the job ticket when the non-conforming product belonged to. So let's see, hold on, let me just finish reading this and I'll explain it. Then check the record non-conforming product log to ensure it was logged and then return job ticket where it was. The final step, depending on disposition for the parts, will be as followed. So what that one is saying pretty much that once it's been dispositioned, so let's say that it was dispositioned as scrap. Okay, so then you would give it to Lorenzo and he'll scrap it. So then what you would do is you would take this tag off of the parts, you would put it on the record form, and you would just put it right here at the bottom. Try not to cover anything, or put it on the side here if there's nothing written. Just put it so that it's not covering anything important or any dates or anything like that. And then you would look at the job. So if there's a job, with it, you just need to make sure that it was logged here first on the non-conforming product log. And if it wasn't, just go ahead and enter it. Again, the date that would be here, you could just put the date that's on here. And then you would go and put it back with the job ticket, the job traveler. Any questions on that part?
No.
You guys? No?
Makes sense.
Okay. Let's see. 1 minute. So it has a little note here that's saying pretty much, these are for customer returns only as well. So when there's a customer return, sometimes they send extra documents with their return, sometimes they don't. There was one, I think it was for Moog, where there was like 5 pages that they sent along with it. So what you just need to do is you need to make sure to, when you staple this to the job traveler, you want to staple those extra documents with it as well.
Sure.
That's all. That's
Sweet.
what I'm saying, yeah. If approval is given for disposition as used as is, these will be sent back to the same customer. The parts will be repackaged. The customer service representative shall inform the customer for the RMA. So again, this one is just for, purchasing or Priscilla. Sale of the Priscilla. If approval is given for the disposition of return to vendor, the purchasing department will email the vendor. The parts will be repackaged and sent back to the customer. Or vendor, sorry. If approval is given for disposition as scrap, the parts are given to the Coast ACM QA inspector, which is Lorenzo. The parts are destroyed and disposed of immediately. If approval is given for the disposition of reprocess, wait for reprocessing instructions from management. And that's pretty much it on there. For the approval of the given disposition of not as claim, the parts will... that doesn't make sense. The parts will be further inspected by Coast ACM and found no rejectable criteria. Parts are repackaged and sent back to the customer. Okay. If approval is given for the disposition of non-flight, QA department puts these back into stock. So these ones, the only thing is that you want to write on there that they were dispositioned as non-flight. Usually at least what I've noticed is that I see this is actually still on the parts. So when they're dispositioned as non-flight, which that practically means that we can still use them, they just can't be used for flight or space parts.
Okay.
That's what that's saying. But they need to know that. Because if you just put them in there, just the part number, that's it, people won't know. So you want to leave this on there and put like non-flight on there, or disposition as non-flight. That's the only time that you wouldn't put this tag on the record for. Okay. And then here's some more, records and some references on there.
Okay.
So any questions? Cause no.
Nope. I'm just gonna stop.
Okay.